Good afternoon, distinguished colleagues and fellow professionals. It is a privilege and an honor to join you and also to present this paper at this year's IFLA Africa conference titled Reframing the African Landscape, with emphasis on sustainable and inclusive landscapes. The topic of this paper is understanding the vernacular, what we can learn about responsive design from informal settlements. It will be presented on behalf of Dr. Lanusi and my humble self, Robo Akpami. So let's dive right in. So when we're talking about vernacular knowledge, what we are talking about is indigenous local knowledge. This knowledge has been gained over time by basically our survival instincts. So in the process of trying to survive, we have been able to find ways uh, to design our environment and make it more suitable for living. The case will study three case studies, Makoko in Lagos, which is within the coastal belt, Osun Sacred Grove, which is the rainforest belt, and Zaria, which is the savanna. The idea is that we're trying to glean from informal and cultural landscapes and use what we get there to further improve modern frameworks, design frameworks. So, as an introduction, it's good to know that the African urban and rural landscapes are under pressure from climate change, pressure from rapid urbanization, and the depletion of the rural environment. And another thing is that there's a dominance of Western uh, planning models within our system. And we would need to decolonize, in quote, as I wrote, or rather localize our way of solving environmental problems. So the aim of this study is to investigate certain Nigerian landscapes, and it's important because the landscapes are within a context, and that context is within our environment, and see what we can gain from uh, the strategies and the practices within this landscapes. So we're going to examine the objectives, would examine the resilience of Makoko in Lagos, would examine the effects, the traditional effects of the sacred grove on the Oshun environment. It's a forest region, and would also examine the strategies, climate responsive strategies in the savannah, which is Zaria. And hopefully at the end of the day, we'll be able to get one or two things or uh, would derive some practices that or principles that we can adapt or adopt in our planning models. So, like I said earlier, the focus is on the Nigerian context. And in Nigeria, it will be good to know at this point that we have several vegetation belts. Lagos is closest to the Atlantic. Further down, we have the forest region, and up we have the savannah. That's where Zaria is located. And this is Lagos, closer to the Atlantic Ocean. Also important to note, we have two major seasons, the rainy season and the dry season. So the eastern winds bring dry air, which picks up dust from the Sahara into Nigeria, whilst the southwesterly winds pick up water and humidity and it flows into the country. So the method of this study would be a desk research, and it will be case study based, as I've mentioned earlier. The themes are vernacular resilience uh, and sustainability. So the literature review looks at several texts on uh, Makoko and the Zaria and Oshun case studies. But before we go into the literature review of those areas, I like us to know that when we talk about resilience, we're talking about the ability to bounce back. And when we talk about vernacular knowledge, we're talking about how people are able to utilize local materials to adapt to their environment. So this is a typical Hausa settlement in the north. The environment is actually semi-arid. The further north you go, the more arid it gets. It becomes more like a desert, and the weather is usually very harsh in those areas. Now, this Google map is showing the image of the satellite image of the Oshun Sacred Grove. So this part where we can see green is actually the Sacred Grove. So it's a cultural place that has been uh, designated as a heritage site by UNESCO. There is governed by cultural laws, there are taboos around the place and all that. In between it, I don't know how clearly you can see, but this is the Oshun River. It flows practically inside this Oshun Grove. So these are some photos of how the grove looks like. These are deities. This is the Oshun River. And Oshun River is believed to help people with fertility issues. This is another deity that you can see is entwined with the roots of this tree. It goes to tell you that there's some form of connection uh, between the gods, the deities, and nature and ecology. This is a mud shrine that they use to worship. And then we're now at Zaria, which is the savannah. This is some degrading landscapes in Zaria. As a matter of fact, it's gradually becoming common place to see land portions of lands eroded in Zaria. This is caused mainly by overgrazing of cows and other animals. And because of those animals have been able to remove the land cover, the green cover, and water is able to find its way around and wash uh, the soils. Below is these are some of the agricultural practices, the water harvesting agro type of farming that helps with water, and you can see trees scattered around. In the savannah, the trees are not densely populated as you have in the forest region. So they are scattered around, but they are quite important because they also serve as they serve to block, to shade from the dust coming in from the Sahara Desert. So we talked about, I had mentioned formal sustainable frameworks and models. So I just want to highlight three that we might be looking into a bit closely. Yeah, so they are different. There are several sustainable models. There are biophilic design. You have the circular economy framework. You have smart city concepts, you have 15-minute city, you have the eco city, transit design models. But for this study, we're going to look at the sponge city concept. We'll also consider nature-based solutions and green infrastructure. So when you talk about sponge city, it's they were looking at urban porosity of an environment, of a region, of a place. So how much water can that place absorb? Can it retain? And can it release gradually into the environment? So this is observed or achieved by having water parks, by having uh, uh, paved walkways that are permeable so that water can percolate into the soil. And so that's sponge city concepts. The green nature-based solutions are when we depend on nature we go back to the normal systems of nature to solve environmental problems. Green infrastructure is utilizing natural and semi-natural systems to equally solve uh, our environmental problems. So we're talking about our first case study now, Makoko in Lagos. So this is a floating city or slum, if you may. This is where people call the Venice of West Africa, Venice of Nigeria. Yeah. So we have some challenges here, which are flooding, marginalization. There's a lot of social problems because, of course, as you might imagine, most people living in Makoko are not well to do, but there are people who have been able to uh, manage what they have to build a lifestyle. So there's poor drainage, there's poor waste management, there's pollution, water pollution, and all that. But yet, in the midst of that, we're still able to get some lessons. The architecture is amphibious, as a matter of fact, innovative. This is a floating school that was designed by architects Kunle Adeyemi, which happens to have won him several awards world over. And the school is practically built on barrels. So it's like a boat floating on water. So that's why it's called the floating school. By the right, you can see an image showing the poor waste management. If you look clearly, you see the water here is quite black. So those are some of the challenges that vernacular knowledge has not been able to tackle. However, there are, like I said earlier, there are things we can gain. So we're coming to the Sacred Grove in Osogbo in Osun State. So the challenges, like I mentioned earlier, the urban encroachment, the rapid urbanization. If you remember from the picture, I'm trying to move as fast as I can because of time. But if you remember the first image I showed, the satellite image, everywhere apart from the groove. The groove was the only green area on that map. So this is the water I spoke about, where people come and perform rituals. You can see that the area has been conserved. So there's hardly any, people don't cut down trees, they don't tamper with, they don't kill animals, the biodiversity is strong and all that. And now we go to Zaria, the savanna landscape. So the challenges in Zaria is the issue of water. There's water stress, desertification, like I spoke about, sand coming in from the northeast, being carried by the northeast winds. But if you notice this, to the right is the palace, the entrance to the palace of the Emir of Zozo in Zaria. It shows the architecture, the character of the architecture in the north is quite strong and emphatic. They use clay, adobe, mud, very thick walls, and they usually build their buildings round in a courtyard style, with a courtyard style. This helps to maintain thermal comfort within their buildings because, like I said earlier, the weather is quite harsh. The conditions are harsh. And they use low-tech methods to do climate sensitive form of designs. You can see by the left, this is a typical landscape you find in Zaria. So you probably have hills, scattered trees, and grassland. Even though a lot of the grassland is gradually disappearing because of the overgrazing, as I mentioned earlier. So there's the traditional water harvesting, climatic adaptation in the buildings, and all that. So you see thick walls, and these walls are able to prevent them because during Harmattan it's actually very cold and very hot. So in the mornings and in the evenings it's very cold, and the dust can be terrible, especially when you go further north. So from the results from the uh, case studies, of course, like I said, I have to move quite fast. But you'll see that the teams between formal and vernacular, the teams are similar. And uh, though there are gaps within vernacular knowledge and formal model frameworks, there are definitely some gaps, but all around you can see that there's some form of uniformity. So vernacular practices are done without technological input, without uh, great studies, expensive studies carried out as compared to the formal sustainable models. So, but together, if we're able to merge what we learn from local practices and combine them and make them context sensitive, that is to our environment, to our climate, uh, together would have a better working model for landscape developments. Not just landscape developments, for landscape planning and for our, I'm talking about like a hybrid model, a hybrid framework. So in conclusion, one of the authors that I read his article, or that we went through his article, he described vernacular landscapes as living laboratories, meaning that we can actually experiment with them and we can align with resilience and adaptive capacity ideas. And eventually, we would have to, like I said earlier, decolonize our thinking so that when we bring foreign, or what we might want to call modern or contemporary planning models, we're able to infuse them, we're able to suit them to the local environment within our context. So if we must reshape African cities for the future, we must not take everything hook, line, and sinker. That is what I'm trying to say. Must be sensitive to our culture, must be sensitive to our peoples, must be sensitive to the social realities, the ecology, and the climate in which we have found ourselves. So, what is my recommendation towards, or what is our recommendation towards a new design ethos? Is to integrate the principles behind vernacular design in education, so that as we are raising professionals, we are raising professional architects, raising professional planners, raising professional uh, environmentalists, there should be that understanding that how do we work with, or how do we incorporate indigenous practices into what we are doing? And we should also advocate for flexibility in our regulations and policies so that we're able to accommodate uh, the poor in and those in the lower economic class in development. Development should be able to carry people along. Like I spoke about the sand feeling of I don't know if the sand feeling of Makoko area. And that is going to make it quite expensive for most people to be able to stay there if they're able to sand fill that area, because land will become very expensive. So the last recommendation would be to recognize landscape architects as a very important bridge in between the environmental, cultural, and social space. Because not only there are several professionals, but as landscape architects, we're able to create a design, a plan, and we're able to put the studies of different professionals together and map a way out. And I think landscape architects should begin to uh, to strive for that. It's been a pleasure. I hope I've not gone past 10 minutes. Thank you so much. Again, my name is Robo Akpami. Have a splendid deliberation.